All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Mary Corris. I'm a Principal Product Marketing Manager here at Dragos, and welcome to our webinar. Today, we are going to discuss how to maximize opportunities by starting early with your INSM planning. We will cover what is NERC CIP 15 and why you should start now. We are joined today by our knowledgeable speakers, Phil Tonkin, Dragos Field CTO specializing in the energy sector, and Shelby Brooks, our Senior Industrial Consultant and NERC CIP expert. We have a lot to cover today, so thank you so much for joining us. But before we get started, I'm going to cover a couple of housekeeping items. This session is being recorded, and the recording will be emailed to everyone within 1 to 2 business days. And we will include these slides and some additional content relevant to this pending NERC standard. Your microphones are muted, but we still hope to make this session as interactive as possible. So as you have questions, go ahead and use that Q&A chat function. Throughout the session, submit any you might have as they come up, and we'll try to get to them at the end. So for today's agenda, we're going to start by breaking down the INSM requirements. We will then take a closer look into how threat groups are increasingly targeting the electric sector and why robust network security monitoring is more vital than ever. We will discuss the critical role that threat intelligence plays in enhancing your security posture. We will then learn how Dragos can help you meet the INSM requirements efficiently and effectively, and we'll explore incentives available for addressing these requirements promptly, as well as the benefits for early implementation. We're going to walk through the key milestones and timelines for implementing as we start to move towards the standard adoption. And finally, we'll find out why Dragos is the right partner to help you navigate these requirements and strengthen your overall security infrastructure. And then we'll wrap up with a live Q&A, as I mentioned. So with that, Shelby, I'm going to hand it over to you to get us started.
Thank you, Mary. So up until this point, CIP requirements have been primarily concerned with monitoring the ESP and its associated systems. Under CIP 15, organizations will need to implement continuous monitoring of network traffic within trusted zones, including ESPs. The main goal when developing CIP 15 was to really improve the detection and response to adversaries who have evaded traditional perimeter defenses. And what do we mean by that? We mean firewalls, VPNs, intrusion detection systems. This focus on east-west or lateral traffic will enable more effective identification of potential threats, which ultimately will lead to earlier detection and faster threat mitigation. Before we dive into each specific requirement for INSM, I think it's worthwhile to briefly mention the 3 security objectives that FERC wanted to achieve with the development of these new requirements. First, baseline development. So each responsible entity must establish baselines of their network traffic within the CIP network environment. So again, within that trusted zone, within the ESP. Second, responsible entities will need to monitor for and detect unauthorized activity, connections, devices, and software within their CIP network environment. And third, responsible entities are required to identify anomalous activity with high confidence by logging network traffic, maintaining logs and other related data, and implementing measures to then prevent attackers from removing evidence of their tactics, techniques, and procedures, or TTPs, from compromised devices. So when we break down the INSM requirements, there are 3 requirements. The first is about monitoring, detecting anomalies, evaluating the detected activities, and then determining an appropriate course of action. So let's take a look at the sub-requirements of R1. 1.1, this has to do with asset owners assessing their networks within ESPs or other trusted zones to identify those potential collection points and ultimately determining the optimal placement of sensors for effective monitoring. Each asset owner is responsible for conducting a risk analysis to find the right balance of monitoring. As mentioned in NERC's technical rationale for CIP 15, some collection points might be excluded from INSM if they represent redundant network traffic that is already being monitored somewhere else. 1.2 is really the heart of the INSM requirements, detecting anomalous network activity. But what does this entail? and what is the spirit of the requirement. Anomalous network activity is much more inclusive than just detecting anomalies. It is important to note that Dragos employs 4 types of threat detection. Ultimately, these detections offer a comprehensive approach that not only detects anomalous activities, but it also provides the context that you need to assess those detections. This ultimately helps users respond effectively, minimize false alerts, and improve the accuracy of threat detection. Sub-requirement 1.3 has to do with if you do detect something anomalous, how do you then evaluate and respond to it? Requirements 2 and 3 are more about the processes. Requirement 2 is about how you store and retain the data. Requirement 3 deals with how do you protect that data, again, to prevent an adversary from removing evidence of their tactics, techniques, and procedures. Those familiar with NERC-CIP will recognize that these 2 requirements are pretty common in CIP standards.
So what INSM really represents is a reflection of a change in the threat landscape. One of the great things about NERC-CIP is its maturity. It's one of the first sets of regulations that applied to power grids anywhere in the world. And it started with a set of controls which were really about managing the hygiene of security controls in the electricity grid environment. What we've seen over the past few years with the introduction of things like CIP 13 reflecting a change in in the supply chain security concerns, CIP 14 an ever increasing physical threat to to the cyber assets and the critical electricity system. The CIP 15 reflects a change to the threat landscape that people are now able to either circumvent or work within the controls that are defined and often well maintained. We see that there are a number of issues that have been manifesting that allow adversaries to work within the environment, live off the land, and make their way through electricity grid environments in order to create the effect that their intention is, which is ultimately to disrupt energy operations. All electricity companies are interested in one thing. It's not preventing a cyber attack. It's preventing the loss of electricity and the loss of energy being supplied to their customers. That's their objectives to get that energy reliably to the consumer that needs it. And so it's as we see that evolution and we track the behaviors that are going on in these environments, we can see how actors are starting to understand those controls and work their way around them and get a better understanding of the types of equipment that are being used, the protocols that are being used, and the systems that are out there and critical in these particular operations. The controls themselves, we see some of these have begun to be deployed over a number of years just through normal risk management. So the first thing that INSM is looking to cover in the first part of the timeline, which we'll go through shortly, is the critical sites, the BES high facilities such as control centers, making sure that we are deploying monitoring technologies, looking at traffic that is going around within those networks, and that's inside of these areas, and trying to make sure that those any anomalous behavior occurring within those networks and any threats that beginning to manifest can be detected early before they have an impact. And so that we can also learn from any behavior that occurs. It's quite difficult to track what might have happened if you're not monitoring what's happening within that space. It's not possible for others to learn from those behaviors if we're not monitoring those particular threats. So we see that what we call here level 3, which aligns in a limited way to the Purdue model, those control centers that are being monitored. But over time, these controls are being pushed further down into the less critical facilities, but still very important. These are the BES medium facilities, the large generation plants up 1,500 megawatts, some of the largest transmission substations. They also require monitoring and have often their own SCADA systems, and certainly within the security perimeter. there's a requirement to do a lot of monitoring there to make sure that the assets that have got that external routable connectivity, we see what type of connections they have, we're baselining those communications and looking for any intersections there that might show that an adversary with nefarious intent has got into that space. But there's a lot of other equipment out there on those sites. Often it goes beyond the external routable connectivity. Each utility has its own way of managing the scope of that, of what falls into that particular category. Often communications in those critical facilities like the BES medium substations, they've been limited by the introduction of things like serial links or other devices that sit between the routed network that goes over to the control centers and the other devices that sit within the substations, such as the protection IEDs, the RTUs, the IO devices that might be gathering information, such as alarms. Those devices can, in many cases, been architected out of the need to monitor for compliance, but there's a great deal of benefit in monitoring those for other types of activity to ensure that the risks around those devices are also being monitored. So why are the controls that INSM is introducing important? What we've learned by using important information that we've discovered through threat intelligence is that there are many adversarial groups out there that are now targeting facilities that are operated by power grids. The controls that have historically been in place have maintained really good controls around the perimeter, around how systems are accessed by those who are supposed to access them. But we find that adversarial groups now are beginning to use living off the land techniques to move around within the controls that are set in these spaces. Those groups are targeting directly power grids all over the world. We've got groups like VoltSite that are known to be targeting North American electricity infrastructure, and they're operating right now in the IT enterprise and trying to get into the control centers. We've witnessed that behavior, and we know that they're trying to use the kind of types of connectivity that are deliberately engineered into those systems and allowed. So there's only a certain amount of time before those controls eventually will be circumvented. If we look at other examples from other threat groups, groups like Electrum have been targeting the power grid infrastructure in Ukraine for a number of years. If we go back as far as 2015, they managed to circumvent the controls and allow them to move from the IT space, level 4, into the control centers by pivoting through all of our infrastructure, using the deliberately engineered remote access capabilities to get into those spaces, and took over the SCADA systems to send commands down into the substation environment. And through a variety of other techniques, managed to maintain persistence in that environment and sustain the loss of power to a large number of customers in 3 different regions of Ukraine. By 2016, they took those techniques to get into those environments, but pivoted even further down, right down into the substation, so that they could create longer and more persistent events, potentially even looking to create physical damage. Because attacking substations can be more directly impactful of a very particular region rather than attacking a control center, which might be seen to have a larger impact. But the protective systems are down there at that level, and it's the protection that keeps the system safe. So it's a worrying development, but the other major development at that time was they showed an understanding of the protocols that were sent. No longer were they just taking remote control of a facility and pressing buttons, but instead now they were actually sending direct commands through to the devices that are used within the substation. In 2022, they took that capability and re-engineered it to use it from the distribution control centers. And by executing malware on the SCADA systems in the control centers to send IC104 commands, a commonly used protocol in the electricity industry in Europe and in wider environments, they were sending commands down to the RTUs, instructing the opening of circuit breakers. And whilst that might not necessarily be the command protection, might not be the command protocol that is used from the control centers to the substations in the United States, the techniques and tactics and procedures are repeatable and can be applied to different protocols. You can write the ability to send commands via IC104, you can do it with DNP3. And so you've got to come up with new ways of detecting and protecting against those techniques, tactics, and procedures. And that's what INSM is doing. The firewalls no longer protect against those particular types of threat, because that's how the adversaries are actually getting through these environments. They're sending commands on dedicated control channels that have been set up, and they're working within the security controls that are set. So you got to start to monitor those traffic behaviors to see how they might be manipulated. How did they get onto the SCADA system in the first place? What techniques and tactics did they use to get there? So looking back in retrospect, being able to look through the traffic and the logs to see how an adversary might have got there, and then looking for changes in behavior, like the commands that are being sent. Are they changing in frequency? Are they being sent to multiple different locations simultaneously? Things that may not be normal. It's not normal for a control center to send open commands to multiple substations at once, not at the volumes that are usually being seen in adversarial activity. So by having the right tools in place, you can monitor that traffic and identify those threats, hopefully before they are actually manifesting as a loss of power. Because what we know about the adversaries that are operating in this space is they spend a lot of time dwelling, building out an understanding of the environment, doing reconnaissance, maintaining persistence, which gives the defenders a lot of time to take the appropriate actions in order to prevent an attack from actually creating the loss of energy, which is what most energy companies are most concerned about. So now to just talk about how Dragos platform aligns with those INSM requirements. When we think about the first requirement about monitoring the network, the first place we're going to start is looking at the network traffic within these high sites and medium sites by taking a tap of the traffic from the network and feeding it into one of our sensors. That's going to be achieved in a number of different ways by hopefully either switching on something like span ports on the devices, mirror ports. We have to work within the capabilities of the devices that are being used in these spaces. At the control centers, we're likely to have sophisticated IT enterprise grade switches, and that can support things like RSPAN. And that makes monitoring relatively straightforward to implement. But as we move down into the more OT specific environments, when you start to see switches from industrial vendors, the capabilities varies from switch. They vary from switch to switch. So it's important that we work with a partner to understand what the right capability is on the devices and the best way to monitor the traffic in that environment. It's a difficult environment to work in, and we're not going to look to introduce anything that might bring risk to the space. So we work together to try and identify ways to get that traffic into a Dragos sensor. Deploying sensors using the Dragos platform has another advantage. It's the Dragos platform sensors don't operate in isolation. They operate to give you a view of the full enterprise. That helps to understand how the adversaries may be moving around within networks by having sensors in the control center, by having sensors in substations. You can bring that information together and correlate it into the detections for particular threat behaviors. In particular, when adversaries are living off the land, you can see that chain of events that might lead to compromise. The monitoring of those devices can be quite complicated. There's deliberately a limited amount of traffic that moves around within substations. It's engineered for very specific tasks. Sometimes to get all of the visibility that you may want within this space, it may be enough just to monitor the individual devices that are communicating. But in some cases, you may want to initiate some additional communication with those devices in order to solicit further information from them, in order to get devices to identify themselves, in order to get them to expose information such as their firmware numbers, their serial numbers, and to really validate exactly which devices are out there and on the network, and help with things like other use cases, things like vulnerability management. That you can use things like active scanning in order to probe those devices and get that extra information that you're looking for. Beyond that, we're moving into detection. How we're going to look for the behaviors themselves. Firstly, by building a baseline of that site, by monitoring communications within these sites to look for what the normal traffic between protection IDs, between RTUs and the control centers. You can build a model of what normal looks like. That model helps to understand change. You can see the things like frequency within those systems to see how often things are being typically sent, such as a circuit breaker open command, and as we looked at in that previous example of a known threat. The changes to configurations of devices, just the action of that change, being seen over the network can be correlated with other things, and so you can just start to understand where and when behaviors are happening in this space. Configuration changes are normal. We do not want, to be alerting on every single change that happens within an environment, but knowing how it's happened, when it's happened, by seeing the connections between things like engineering workstations and the IEDs themselves can help build a picture of anomalous behavior. After that, you're really into the intelligence-driven threat detections. The fact that you can take the threat intelligence, the known information about what is happening in the wider threat landscape, understanding how actors are targeting power grids, both in the United States and across the world, can help us understand how to protect other utilities. So by looking at the previous attacks that have happened, taking the insights that we have from both that first-party threat intelligence and the incident responses that we do in some of our customers, we build out detections in the platform, and we build out indicators that help us to understand what the most likely threat vectors might be. These help us to really drive priority when responding to threats in this space. If you just try to look at things like variation from a baseline as the only way of detecting threat, that's going to generate a very, very high volume of things to look at. But if you know that the things that are linked directly to the behaviors of threat actors that have taken effect in these environments in the past, you know that by responding to those, you're going to get a much better success rate in your prioritization of actions. And moving into the final step of evaluating it, it's really important to be able to manage what you're seeing and detecting things. If you're going to get a large volume of detections that have been prioritized by the technology, you then want to be able to have a determined audit trail around the actions that are being taken. You want to know who's taken what actions and when. You want to be able to capture evidence of what you've been doing and store that with the time record of when you've been doing what in this space. On top of that, though, with Dragos, we have a number of other services that are really unique and really will assist in the evaluation of what's happening in this space. One of those is the OT Watch service, which is our managed threat hunting service. That it can allow you to engage a wider team of experts who do this all day long, looking at the threats that are occurring within these spaces. And they can go hunting for the threats that might be occurring in your environment based on what they're seeing in other customers' spaces. And that's by having that known, trusted team of individuals who are doing this day in, day out. You can use those in tandem with your own SOC and your own monitoring capabilities and your own engineers to really build a great deal of value out of having this kind of detection capability. Neighborhood Keeper is a really unique capability in that this takes pseudo-anonymized information from similar customers' environments, and there's many electricity customers across the United States are using this capability already. They're doing that in order to share the insights around what detections are happening. Nobody knows which utilities these are coming from, but you do know that they're coming from other similar organizations in similar geographies. And it's that quantifiable information about what threats are actually manifesting that can really help to drive the prioritization of activity within this space. It can be very, very difficult to track exactly how the adversaries might be behaving, when it's hard to share information between organizations, because as soon as you declare an incident, it triggers a number of different actions. So quantifiable information about what the real threats are can help you to prioritize your own works in this space. And that's what Neighborhood Keeper is doing. It's giving people the ability to share that information without exposing themselves as individuals in order to create a collective benefit. Within the Dragos platform, we codify the intelligence that we have into things that are actually actionable for you. Our incident responders who are going out and dealing with incidents day in, day out, they are working on these incidents, but they're also documenting how other people can fix these things. And Dragos platform builds that knowledge into what we call playbooks. And so when you get a detection, it's not just telling you you had a problem, it's giving you the information and the insights on how to go out there and fix that. And the team of Dragos experts from the threat intelligence team, our services team, and the wider customer-facing organizations are all building into those playbooks to make sure that their customers have got the best chance of responding in the most efficient way. And all of that is supported by that dedicated OT threat intelligence team. That team, the only team that's out there who are only focused on operational technology threats, building out insights into the specific threats that target organizations such as electricity grids. Why should we start to try and adopt these technologies sooner rather than later? As you'll hear in our next slide, Shelby will talk about the timelines that will drive the compliance with the INSM regulations. And for NERC-CIP high facilities and the medium facilities with external routable connectivity, we have up to 5 years to physically have these things in place before they're required for compliance. It seems like a long time into the future. Last year, FERC issued an order which gave utilities and regulated utilities, both publicly owned and non-public utilities, the opportunity to treat the investments in cybersecurity as a regulatory asset and then recover this money over a 5-year period, allowing you to amortize the cost of these investments over 5 years, which basically allows organizations not just to recover the costs, but to gain a return on investment in this space as well. Really by treating these things as a regulated asset actually allows utilities to make a return by spending their money on facilities that would deliver a tangible cybersecurity benefit. Now, even within that, there are 2 defined pre-qualified technologies that can be deployed. Organizations can join the CRISP scheme, but also it's defined that they can deploy internal network security monitoring capabilities. This was something that FERC had the foresight to recommend. They recognized the value and the importance of doing this, even though it was going to take time to build it into regulation. So really, exciting opportunity for utilities to be able to recover these monies directly if they start to invest in them now. This is only available as an opportunity and can be cancelled as soon as these things become mandatory. So in 3 years' time, when it becomes mandatory in NERC-CIP high environments, this will not be available anymore. And in the medium sites with external routable connectivity in 5 years' time, or once this comes into effect, that will no longer be available. So the opportunity is right now to get the full benefit of this incentive. So, one of the really exciting reasons to start to think about how to invest in these technologies straight away. But there's a number of other things to consider. These are not straightforward technologies to deploy. The technologies themselves are, they're stable and understood and mature, so they can be deployed into these environments, but the amount of engineering that's required can be quite complex. I spent a number of years trying to work out how to deploy technologies in this space. I've deployed monitoring technologies into substations, and the first few that you do, there's a lot of pace, a lot of momentum. It's new and there's interest and there's a lot of dynamicism in how people are working as they try to understand what this is and what the benefit is. But as you try and scale up to tens, 20s, potentially hundreds of substations, the programs become more complex. The processes become quite rigid. So there's a huge number of stakeholders that need to be involved. Then we've got to approach this in a really methodical, engineered fashion, as you would expect with any technology that's deployed onto a resilient power grid, and work across all of those teams. I've seen a number of cases in the past where the teams have come together very quickly and got the technology out to one or two substations, but when it comes to scaling it up, the process slows down. And so when you think about the size of that challenge, that in 5 years' time, every substation that reached the threshold for this CIP 15 requirement, it's going to be quite a considerable task to get it done in that amount of time. So it really, we urge people to start that process now, understand the technologies they've got, the changes that need to be made in the policies, so that as new substations are being built, as well as new networks are being deployed, they're already enabled to take this type of technology. That's another thing from you having experienced in the deployment of this technology in substations, is that you're working against a moving set of goals. You've planned a program of retrofitting this technology into existing substations, and new substations are appearing without it. So baking these requirements into the specifications for new sites as well, visiting existing let contracts that might be out there with EPC vendors, with system integrators, to make sure that every opportunity to try and get this technology deployed is taken advantage of, and make sure that filing is done to try and recover the costs of these things, and make sure that amortization is in place that you can benefit from the fact that these are recurring costs and to run a system like this. And so take real notice that this timeline that's about to come up is going to be really generous, but at the same time, it's still going to be a considerable challenge as you work out how not just to deploy the technology, but as Shelby would talk about, you've got to deploy all of the processes and get this all enabled so everybody can make the most of the technology that's being deployed to really look to mitigate risk in the space.
So where are we at today in the implementation timeline? On June 24th, NERC submitted the petition for approval of the proposed reliability standard CIP 15 to FERC. We are currently awaiting FERC to have a discussion and file an order approving reliability standard CIP 15. FERC does not have any open meetings in August, so we're potentially looking at the September timeframe. We'll be keeping an eye out to see if it makes it onto the agenda. But after that point, once FERC has approved, there is a 36-month time frame for entities to then implement CIP 15, so all of their processes and technical controls, implementing this for high and medium facilities with external routable connectivity. And then T plus 60 months is when it goes into effect for other medium BES cyber systems. This seems like a long time frame, but those that have implemented NERC CIP requirements know that there's a lot of work that goes into the process of rolling this out. Phil just talked through the advanced cybersecurity incentives, so getting the ball rolling early and implementing this prior to it being required. But what goes into this process of rolling out new requirements? First, you have to understand the requirements. You're creating documentation, updating plans. So for instance, your incident response plan, making updates to that to account for INSM, digging into that a little bit more. What controls are you going to put into place, technical as well as procedural? Implementing CIP 15 requirements early prior to it being enforced allows you to work out any issues in advance. You can then think through, how do I prove compliance? Imagine how the auditors are going to audit and what they're expecting to see. So again, although 36 months kind of seems like a long time frame, there's a lot to be done in a short period of time to get ready for INSM. So we've talked a lot today about the technology at Dragos, but I want to spend some time looking at the Dragos services and how our services organization can help you meet INSM as well as other NERC CIP requirements. The sensor placement studies are directly applicable to R1.1 for INSM. This is where you have to perform a risk analysis and determine the appropriate balance of monitoring. So what we at Dragos will do, we'll come in, we'll take a look at your network documentation, have interviews with subject matter experts, and we are looking to analyze and then provide recommendations of where Dragos sensors can be placed within your environment. We're looking for that optimal visibility within your network to recommend. Our goal is to provide you with the information that you need to make the decision of where you will monitor. The decision is up to the asset owner in reference to INSM in order to determine the appropriate balance and risk acceptance of what will be monitored. Now, thinking about evaluating and detecting the anomalous network activity, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about incident response. We have both proactive and reactive services when we look at our various service offerings across Dragos. Dragos will facilitate and perform tabletop exercises. So this is to exercise your incident response plan and then provide feedback for lessons learned and areas of future improvement. We have incident response plan development workshops. Unless you are new to NERC-CIP, you already have an incident response plan that you have developed. It's been tested, it's repeatable. But workshops for our NERC-CIP customers are typically focused on either modifying the current incident response plan. We may be developing playbooks or runbooks that go into more detail than an incident response plan, and then also helping you align your plan with the current landscape. As we talk through today, threat groups are increasingly targeting the electric sector, and ransomware is continually on the rise. Dragos releases quarterly ransomware reports, and the Q2 report from this year showed a significant increase in activity. The number of ransomware attacks almost doubled in the Q2 of 2024 compared to the Q1. If you don't have a playbook specifically designed for ransomware, now is the time to develop one. I also want to talk about our rapid response retainer. So you can purchase a set number of hours that will ultimately get you availability to our rapid response retainer hotline, which is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in case you need us. This ensures that in the event that you have some sort of anomalous network activity, or maybe it's even a confirmed incident in your environment, you have access to our Dragos incident response expertise that can help you respond and recover from those incidents. Lastly, OT threat hunting with OT Watch. We have threat hunters who are experienced in the OT space, and they will investigate suspicious activity in OT environments where the platform is deployed. It is important to note that we do have a compliance sensitive mode for our NERC-CIP customers. This is not an all-encompassing list of Dragos services that we offer relative to NERC-CIP requirements. However, these are the ones that are most applicable for implementing INSM. Phil, back to you.
Yeah. So why, what do we need to look at in this space? We're collecting all of this information, we're getting out there and deploying this technology down into environments that have previously not been seen. And so obviously many organizations are going to be driven by the need to be compliant. It's not uncommon for people to tell me that they find that it's a lot easier to get things done as soon as if they have to do it in order to get compliant. But this isn't just about ticking a box and satisfying the requirements. It's about genuinely trying to make the environment more secure. And electricity companies don't need to be convinced to make their energy networks more reliable and more resilient. That's what they've been doing since their conception. And so it's important to think about the INSM requirements not as something that's being pushed onto people, but it's a way of helping them to get it done. And with organizations, like Dragos, we're often seen as being part of that ecosystem. We've been working alongside power grids, since our inception. We don't do OT generically. We work very closely with a number of different industries, but electricity has been part of our journey since the beginning. We're very much trusted by the electricity community to try and solve, this issue here. By being in these environments, there's a lot of other benefits that organizations can get. By having visibility of the networks that previously have been unmonitored, there's a lot of extra capabilities that can be seen. We can see by looking at that east-west traffic within the substation environment, start to build a picture of all of the communications that are happening. That could help with troubleshooting of the assets. It can help with vulnerability management of those assets. And manage the threats that might be manifesting even further down below the levels that are mandated by the regulations in NER-CIP 15. Dragos has obviously got that visibility of what the threats look like in this space. We've got that threat intelligence, and we know what behaviors are likely to be seen by threat actors trying to manipulate the operations in this space. We're able to detect in this space. And by using those playbooks, by using the experience that we have of going out and working within this space, we know we can help organizations to analyze the information that's there and respond effectively and efficiently, making sure that it is possible for organizations to mitigate these threats before they manifest in that impact on reliability.
Awesome. Thank you, Phil and Shelby. Great walkthrough. Really appreciate it. And we will certainly be hosting more of these sessions around INSM in the coming months as folks prepare. But we do have some great questions that have come in the chat. Feel free to keep dropping them in as we go through. We're going to try and get through as many as we can, and also try and be very respectful of everyone's time on this call today. So I'm going to start throwing these out there. I think, Phil, this one is probably best for you. What are some challenges you've seen when deploying in substations?
Yeah, so deploying any kind of new technology into substations can be really complicated. It's a highly engineered environment. Often when you're building out a protection and control system in a high voltage substation, it takes a lot of work to document every single wire that's installed. The equipment that's installed is tested against things like electrical immunity standards, high temperature ranges. So it can be very unlike a lot of industrial environments. It's something that requires engineering to implement any kind of change. The implementation of something like a sensor in a substation, that sensor needs to meet those same industrial standards. It needs to meet the electrical immunity standards of equipment that's used in this space. So selecting the right equipment that's to be trusted is important, making sure it's understood what the drawing requirements might be, what the commissioning requirements might be when connecting it to the power sources in this site. Establishing the backhaul communications that go from the substation back to the center so that those detections can be responded to. All of these things take quite a lot of very careful planning. And that skill is spread across multiple different people within an organization. The substations engineers themselves have that skill in making sure that the equipment meets the right standards, that the drawings are updated, and even the knowledge of what's supposed to be communicating with what in the site. There are a number of partners that might need to be involved. There are some really predominant OEMs that operate specifically within the electricity industry, and they too are part of this solution. Those organizations that are providing the IDs, the protection relays, the Ethernet switches that get used in substations. Those organizations are going to be a key part of solving this. The telecommunications teams that manage the links from the substations back to the control centers that are going to be absolutely critical for for this solution as well. And those working in tandem with the central security functions that are working in this space. And beyond that, even there are potentially separate teams that look after compliance, who've got a good understanding of how they've maintained the prehistoric NERC-CIP controls in a wider environment. So this is about being about a team effort. But all of that together, all of those different stakeholders, once you've identified who's responsible for what part, how they're going to work together in this new complex environment, it's all going to take time. And I think that's going to be the biggest challenge for anybody looking to implement in a substation. You'll have the talent and it'll be spread across those different people. But that complexity, across multiple different locations, no longer just looking at implementing controls in a control center, but now implementing controls across hundreds of different substations. That's all going to take a lot of time. And that timeline that we just looked at appears really generous. 3 years to implement at the high sites, another 2 years on top of that to implement in the in the medium facilities. But I think that is optimistic if we don't really tackle this in the right order. I think it's getting started, in particular in the substation space, with all that planning and scheduling and understanding of how it's got to be deployed. Finding the right partners to do it. That's all stuff that's going to take a lot of careful consideration. And I would really consider that anybody thinking about this doesn't consider that 5-year deadline to get into the medium sites is something that they can wait to get started on.
Great, Phil. And I think that actually there was a specific question around where do we here at Dragos recommend an organization start with this, and it kind of flows on to what you just mentioned. Is there a good recommendation on how to even begin here?
Yeah, the first thing to do is to get all those different parties together. Get out there, do some pilots. There's a lot of similarity from substation to substation between different utilities. But within that standardization, there's a lot of uniqueness as well. The little details about how different organizations architect their sites, how they've defined the electronic security perimeter within their sites, how they're limiting the scope of that, what kind of visibility they could get. So I would really recommend that pulling those parties together and then putting in place some pilots to try and start to understand how complex this task is going to be will help with the scheduling. If you've got 300 locations that are going to fall into the scope of this, do 10. Understand how long each one of those sites is going to take, and take those lessons learned and build them into a wider program. That 5 years will very quickly disappear without starting soon and getting as early an understanding as possible of how to get into those complex environments is going to be really important.
Great. And of course, we're here to help you with our services that Shelby walked through. Okay, I think we have time for 2 more questions. Let's see, there's a couple I can combine here around the term anomalous. So Shelby, how does NERC define anomalous, or how do we define it? Give us some commentary on that kind of broad word.
Sure. So as part of INSM, NERC actually does not define anomalous network activity. However, here at Dragos, we understand that anomalous network activity is much more encompassing, and it goes beyond just your standard anomaly detection. Again, we have 4 different types of threat detections here at Dragos. The first 2 folks in the industry are probably most familiar with. So modeling, this is more of your traditional anomaly-based detections. We are detecting threats by defining what is normal and measuring against some sort of divergence against that baseline of normal. Kind of along that same vein, configuration detections. So a baseline of communications and devices within the environment, and we will then alert on deviations from that established configuration baseline. But in order to be more encompassing and really truly represent anomalous network activity, you have to then build in these intelligence-driven detections. So there's 2 other types of threat detections that we employ with the Dragos platform. The first one of those is indicators. So again, we have a close integration between our threat intelligence team and the Dragos platform. They will feed in various indicators of compromise into the platform to where we are then automatically analyzing the data that's coming in through the platform against those IOCs, and we will alert you if any of those are seen. The last detection is behavioral detections. So we will also detect and alert on threat behaviors to identify those known adversarial tactics, techniques, and procedures relevant to OT environments. And really, I think that one most closely aligns with FERC's key objectives that they were trying to achieve with the development of INSM. So again, I think anomalous network activity, it's definitely more encompassing than just your standard anomaly-based detections. And it's really a combination of all of those and bringing the context to the detections that you are seeing.
Great. Thanks, Shelby.
Yeah.
All right. Wait.
I think
you have
on
Yeah, go ahead.
just
Go ahead.
on that, yeah. It's the having looked at deploying technologies in this space for a long time, I've seen some real challenges with just using baselining as a means of seeing what's going on in, say, a substation environment. Most solutions that just rely on baselining require a learning period. There's no teaching of the model. In any machine learning system, typically you need to teach it, with some parameters, what normal looks like. And the only parameter most solutions operate in this space is time. You say monitor over a fixed period of time, and then after that, lock it down, and any change from that is bad. But as we know, in substation environments, there are complexities. There are things that occur that can't be predicted within that 2 week period, such as a fault on the system. What happens when that fault occurs, and how the site is configured when that fault occurs. If a circuit breaker fails to open, then the signal will be sent from another device after a certain period of time. That isn't going to be predictable within just a 2 week learning period. So you can see it is a valid way of looking at what normal is to baseline it based on which devices talk to each other. But if you just rely on these values are sent backwards and forwards within that time and don't think about the chain of events, those behaviors that are indicative of a threat manifesting, then from known attack vectors, and then it's highly unlikely that during a threat you'd be able to respond to those things. You'll just instead be spending all of your time responding to false positives. So I think it's really important to consider multiple different abilities to detect anomaly in this space.
Great commentary, Phil. All right, we got time for one more, and I think Phil, probably for you, but Shelby, of course, jump in. Why can't I just use the network monitoring that I already have that's on my perimeter for INSM?
Yeah, so there are for many years there's been a requirement for organizations to have either an IDS or an IPS as part of their perimeter. And those technologies often are signature-based technologies. You see a lot of capabilities built into firewalls, and they rely on somebody building out signatures for known threats. And they're typically around IT-specific threats. But more and more, there are some rule sets that have been created. Some signatures are created for things like snort that's used in Cisco firewall, for example, that you are able to see the traffic that is actually traversing those firewalls. But those firewalls aren't positioned in a way that allows visibility into the east-west traffic of the site. There's a lot of the traffic is going on, particularly in substations, traveling around very large switched networks at layer 2, and the traffic isn't necessarily always visible at the firewall. It's not traversing from zone to zone through through firewalls, and therefore even visible to that technology. But there are other technologies in this space that would argue that they're connected to those switches, but they're not necessarily being maintained to the appropriate level to actually see all of these threats manifesting They don't necessarily have the understanding of what normal looks like. So they're not bringing together that plethora of different capabilities like the platform does with its 4 different detection models. It's not being maintained by an expert group. So it creates a large overhead in this space.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you. I think we're about hit our time here today. We really appreciate everyone's joining us, and thank you to our speakers. We hope the information we've shared here today was helpful and give you a better understanding of how to move forward with these pending CIP 15 standards. We will continue to host sessions, as I mentioned, on this topic, as it will be of vital importance over the next couple of months and years as folks work on these implementations. So let us know, please reach out if there's anything specifically that you would find interest in or value in our experts diving into on a future session on INSM. And thank you again for all of your part in protecting our world's critical infrastructure, and have a great day. Thank you so much.